Good morning, everyone. Honorable dignitaries on the dais, and my dear fellow participants of this lecture today. We have gathered here to celebrate the life and legacy of one of our beloved teachers, Professor K.K. Francis, who was among the torchbearers of economic studies in this part of Kerala. Professor K.K. Francis joined the Department of Economics, SB College, in 1956. Though he had taught many subjects in economics at the graduate and postgraduate levels during the 35 years of his career, development economics, international trade, and macroeconomics were his favorites. Being a dedicated and exceptional teacher, he made learning a joy for himself and for his students. With his profound scholarship and exceptional expository skills, and above all, his tremendous passion for teaching, he touched the hearts, molded the thoughts, and shaped the destinies of generations of students. Professor Francis was a vibrant and multifaceted personality who accentuated by an unforgettable charisma and commendable interpersonal skills. He was an inspiring orator, astute debater, and a seasoned stage performer. He expired on May 1st, 1991, with 1 year left for his retirement. In memory of Professor K.K. Francis, the Department of Economics instituted a memorial lecture in the year 1992. And we have been fortunate to have eminent academicians such as Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar, Professor Sunil Mani, Professor Jyoti Ghosh, Professor Padmini Swaminathan, etc. as resource persons. This year's lecture is the 31st in the series, and we have a very competent academician to deliver this year's Professor K.K. Francis Memorial Lecture in Professor T.T. Srikumar, who is currently the head Department of Communication, the English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad. He has previously taught at the National University of Singapore, MICA, the School of Ideas, Ahmedabad, and Division of Social Sciences, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Professor Sri Kumar is the author of the book ICTs and Development in India, Perspectives on the Rural Network Society, which is published by Anthem Books, London. He has published a great number of articles in national and international journals, which has been, highly reputed. And he has got research experience in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. Professor Sri Kumar has authored or edited 12 books and written over 400 articles in his mother tongue, Malayalam, in various cultural magazines and newspapers. He has been the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Creative Communications, published by Sage Group, and the associated editor of Media Asia, which is published by the Taylor and Francis Group. He's currently the editor of International Journal of Media Studies, which is published by the EFL University. He also serves as a member of the editorial boards of several other prominent journals. On a personal note, Professor Sri Kumar has been a very good friend to many of the current and former faculties of our college. And his close circle of friends include Professor K.K. Francis's daughters and his late son, Mr. Shaji K. Francis. Dear sir, with a lot of affection and happiness, I welcome you to the Professor K.K. Francis Memorial Lecture 2022-23. I cordially welcome our dear Principal Reverend Father Reggie Pikurian, who is the president of the gathering today. I'm glad to share here with all of us with all of you that he's a very constant source of support for all our department's initiatives and our programs. A very hearty welcome to you, dear Father, to this August gathering. To share with us the fond memories of Professor K.K. Francis, we have among us Dr. Joseph Scaria, the head department of Malayalam, SB College. Before pursuing his studies in Malayalam literature, Dr. Scaria had been a student in the Department of Economics, completing his pre-degree and BA Economics programs over the years 1985 to 1990. On various occasions, I have heard him say that he has been fortunate to have been taught by Professor K.K. Francis during his final years of service. With immense joy, I welcome you, dear Joseph Scaria, sir, to this August gathering. I profoundly welcome Jason Matthew to this gathering, who will be joining us a little later, who is the recipient of Professor K.K. Francis Memorial Award for securing the first rank in BA Economics Program 2019-2022. Hearty welcome to our former teachers of the department who have been instrumental in the formation of our students over these years. Very specially, I welcome Professor Joy Kurian, Dr. M.S. James, Professor Dr. Joske Joseph, Dr. Joseph Kurian, Professor T.K. Thomas, Professor M.P. Philip, to this, who are present here. I welcome all of them to this gathering today. Hearty welcome, dear sirs. I gratefully acknowledge the efforts of our teachers and students in the department to gather together all the arrangements of the day for the lecture today. Hearty welcome all my dear teachers and my dear students to this gathering today. Finally, I welcome all the other participants of the lecture, teachers and students from other departments of the college and institutions around our college, and very hearty welcome to our dear alumni of the college. Once again, I welcome you all to this gathering, and I wish you all a very highly engaging session today. Thank you very much.
Good morning, all. Yes. We are all paying homage to one of our great professors, Dr. K.K. Francis, and we are remembering his contributions today. And just before my talk or introduction, my talk, we remember Ma Joseph Pauadil, who was also a professor in the Department of Economics, our former manager and patron. Yesterday, I came across with a quote. One of the famous American artists. His or her, I don't know. The name of that artist is Andy Warhol. That quote says, "In future, you can be famous for 15 minutes." In the postmodern society, the legacy of being historically remembered is very insignificant. That what the quote says. That is what the quote says. So in future, you can be famous only for 15 minutes. But we know many great personalities are remembered by their contributions to the society in many ways. You might have witnessed the number of people came here to Changanasheri in the last 1 week to pay homage to Mar Joseph Pavadil. Even in the midnight of that Wednesday, though, at 1:30, there was a lot of people paying homage to that great bishop. That means this, this quote is not always relevant because many people can go beyond that, either through their authenticity in knowledge or through their contribution to the society in many ways, or the aura they create in their life. In many ways, it can be remembered. Thus, we are remembering a great teacher, Professor K.K. Francis, today, and our head of the department, Dr. Shinu Waki, introduced that great teacher in and said about his contribution. Now we have with us Professor T.T. Srikumar. I already have read many of his books in Malayalam because I am from Malayalam. I am from the department of Malayalam. I noticed in many of his writings, that means he reads the society in a very, I don't know what to say, in a special way. Even the smallest elements in society are noted by him and well said in his articles and books. I have read many of his criticism criticism on Malayalam novels. It's a special way of reading. And as students of Malayalam, that means we are all students of all subjects, I think. As students of Malayalam, or we have a lot of insights. We can receive a lot of insights from his writings. So here you have a great person to show some lights in the area of capitalism as well as democracy. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാം, ഡെമോക്രസി ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്ത ഒരു കാലം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമുക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാം. ഇത് രണ്ടും ഒരേപോലെ ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്തത് ഇതാണ്. ആൻഡ് വി ആർ ഓൾ, ദാറ്റ് മീൻസ് ദിസ് ഈസ് ദ ഏജ് ഓഫ് ഡെമോക്രസി വി സേ. ബട്ട് when we notice there is a common word for democracy and capitalism when I thought of this subject, that is freedom. In democracy we say that freedom is the essential part of democracy, and in capitalism also freedom determines the way of development. So today you may have a lot of deliberations on this area, and I wish all of you to have a fruitful day today, and we all should respect our teachers, especially in the chat GPT's area or era. Chat GPT, many say that it will replace a lot of teaching areas of our teachers, or areas of getting knowledge. So we have a lot of apprehensions in this chat GPT era, but we all have to go on or move on. So we shall remember Professor K.K. Francis and his contributions to the society of Kerala, especially his academic contributions as a professor in this college and as a great economist to the society of Kerala in many ways. And I wish all of you to gain maximum out of the lecture by Professor T.T. Srikumar. I remain. Thank you.
എൻ്റെ ഓർമ്മകളുടെ ഭാഷ മലയാളമാണ്. മലയാളത്തിൽ സംസാരിക്കുക എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ എപ്പോഴോ ചിന്തിച്ചുറപ്പിച്ച ഒരു കാര്യമാണ്. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് ഇവിടെ ഇപ്പോൾ സംസാരിക്കുമ്പോൾ 3 ലെവലിലുള്ള സന്തോഷം ഞാൻ അനുഭവിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ഒന്നാമത്തേത്, ഈ വേദിയിൽ ഒരംഗമായി പങ്കെടുക്കാൻ കഴിയുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതാണ് അതിലൊന്നാമത്തേത്. രണ്ടാമത്തെ കാര്യം, BA ഇക്കണോമിക്സിലെ 1987 മുതൽ 90 വരെ പഠിക്കാൻ കഴിഞ്ഞ ഭാഗ്യത്തെ അനുസ്മരിക്കാൻ കഴിയുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. മൂന്നാമത്തെ കാര്യം, പ്രൊഫസർ KK ഫ്രാൻസിസ് ഉൾപ്പെടെയുള്ള മഹാരഥന്മാരായ അധ്യാപകരുടെ ശിഷ്യനായി കുറേ കാലം ക്യാമ്പസിൽ ജീവിക്കാൻ കഴിഞ്ഞു എന്നുള്ള ഭാഗ്യത്തെ കുറിച്ചാണ്. ഈ 3 കാര്യങ്ങളും പലതരത്തിൽ ഓർമ്മിക്കാനാണ് ഈ സമയം ഞാൻ വിനിയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. 1987 ഞാൻ BA ഇക്കണോമിക്സിന് ഇവിടെ ചേരുമ്പോൾ KK ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറുണ്ട്. സാറ് ഹെഡ് ഓഫ് ദി ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻ്റ് ആണ് എന്നാണ് എൻ്റെ ഓർമ്മ. കാരണം അന്നൊന്നും ഇത് ഇത്തരം കാര്യങ്ങളൊന്നും ഈ ഓർമ്മയ്ക്ക് തന്നെ ഒരു കുസൃതിയുള്ളത്, ഞാനിപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ നിന്നുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ എന്തൊക്കെയാണോ ഓർമ്മിക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുന്നത് അതൊക്കെയാണ് എൻ്റെ ഓർമ്മ. അതിലെത്രത്തോളം യാഥാർത്ഥ്യമുണ്ടോ ആ യാഥാർത്ഥ്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ യാഥാർത്ഥ്യമാണ് എന്ന് വിചാരിക്കാനും വിശ്വസിപ്പിക്കാനുമാണ് എൻ്റെ ശ്രമം. അടുത്ത കാലത്ത് പലയിടത്തായിട്ട് ഉദ്ധരിക്കേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു പുസ്തകമുണ്ട്, ആൻ വൈറ്റ്ഹെഡിൻ്റെ മെമ്മറി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞൊരു പുസ്തകമുണ്ട്, റൗട്ട്ലെഷ് പബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ഓർമ്മയ്ക്ക് വലിയൊരു കുസൃതിയുണ്ട്. ഓർമ്മയുടെ റീസൺസും വ്യത്യസ്തമാണ്. ഇപ്പോൾ ഇങ്ങനെ ഓർമ്മിക്കാൻ കാരണമാകുന്ന ഒരു സാഹചര്യം ഇതായതുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ അത്തരത്തിൽ ഓർമ്മിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതാണ് യാഥാർത്ഥ്യം. അതുകൊണ്ട് 1990 വരെ BA ഇക്കണോമിക്സിലായിരുന്നു പല വിഷയങ്ങൾ. ഇപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ തന്നെ ഇരിക്കുന്ന മഹാരഥന്മാരായ അധ്യാപകരുടെയൊക്കെ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ ഞാൻ ഇരുന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. നമ്മുടെ ജോയ് കുര്യൻ സാറ്, TK തോമസ് സാറ്, ജെയിംസ് സാറ്, ജോസ് കെ സാറ്, ഇവിടെയൊക്കെ ക്ലാസ്സുകളിൽ ഇരുന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പം ഈ ക്ലാസ്സുകളിൽ ഇരിക്കാൻ കഴിഞ്ഞ പലരും, പിന്നെ ജോസ് മാത്യു സാറ്, പിന്നെ ഇല്ലമ്പള്ളി സാറ്, ഇങ്ങനെ പോരുന്നു. ഒരു കണയം പ്ലാൻ സാറ്, KK ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറ്, ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു പിന്നെ നമ്മുടെ കോയിപ്പള്ളി സാറ്, ഇടയ്ക്ക് ആരെങ്കിലുമൊക്കെ വിട്ടുപോയെന്നിരിക്കാം. പക്ഷെ ഈ അധ്യാപകരുടെയൊക്കെ ക്ലാസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ക്ലാസ് മുറിയിലുള്ള ഇൻറ്ററാക്ഷൻസ് ആണ്. പലരും ക്ലാസ്സിലൂടെ കടന്നു പോകുന്നു, പല കാര്യങ്ങൾ സംസാരിക്കുന്നു. എങ്കിൽ പോലും ഓർമ്മയിൽ ഇത്രയും കാലം തിളങ്ങി നിൽക്കുകയും നമ്മുടെ വ്യക്തിപരമായ പ്രത്യയശാസ്ത്ര അവബോധത്തെ ക്രമീകരിക്കുകയും ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള അധ്യാപകർ ഉണ്ട്. അവരിൽ ഒരാളാണ് KK ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാർ എന്ന് പറയാൻ ഞാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുകയാണ്. കാരണം ഈ മൈക്രോ എക്കണോമിക്സും മാക്രോ എക്കണോമിക്സും ബാങ്കിങ്ങും സ്റ്റാറ്റിസ്റ്റിക്സും എക്കണോമിക്സ് ഓഫ് ഡെവലപ്മെൻറ്റും ഒക്കെ പഠിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. ക്ലാസ്സുകളിൽ പലരും ഇടപെട്ടിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിലും ഈ KK ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറിനെ അനുസ്മരിക്കുന്നത്, സാർ ഇക്കണോമിക് സിസ്റ്റംസ് ആണ് പഠിപ്പിച്ചത്. ഇക്കണോമിക് സിസ്റ്റംസ് എനിക്കും അക്കാലത്ത് വലിയ താല്പര്യമുള്ള, കാരണം അല്പസ്വല്പം രാഷ്ട്രീയ വിചാരങ്ങൾ ഉള്ളിൽ കൊണ്ടു നടക്കുന്നയാളെന്നുള്ള നിലയിൽ ഇത്തരം കാര്യങ്ങൾ കേൾക്കാനും പ്രതികരിക്കാനും വലിയ താല്പര്യം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ സാറ് ക്ലാസ്സിൽ വന്ന് പഠിപ്പിക്കുകയല്ല, ക്ലാസ്സിൽ പങ്കെടുക്കുകയാണ്. പിന്നീടാണ് UGC ഒക്കെ ഈ പാർട്ടിസിപ്പേറ്ററി എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോലെയുള്ള വലിയ ആശയങ്ങളൊക്കെ കൊണ്ടുവരുന്നത്. UGC ഈ ആശയം കൊണ്ടുവരുന്നതിന് മുൻപ് തന്നെ ചില രാജ്യങ്ങളുമായി ബന്ധമുള്ള ചില സ്ഥാപനങ്ങൾ ഇന്ത്യയിൽ ഇത് നേരത്തെ തന്നെ അഡോപ്റ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ പാർട്ടിസിപ്പേറ്ററി എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ എന്താണെന്ന് ക്ലാസ്സിൽ അനുഭവിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് പലപ്പോഴും KK ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറിൻ്റെ ഇക്കണോമിക് സിസ്റ്റംസിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള ക്ലാസ്സുകളിലാണ്. ഇപ്പോൾ സോഷ്യലിസം, ക്യാപിറ്റലിസം പോലെയുള്ള വിഷയങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ച് വളരെ ദീർഘമായി സംസാരിക്കുകയും അത്തരം കാര്യങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ചുള്ള സംശയങ്ങൾ നിവൃത്തീകരിക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുകയും ചെയ്തിരുന്നു. വളരെ സിമ്പിളാണ്. ഇപ്പോൾ ടി കെ തോമസ് സാറൊക്കെ ഇരിക്കുന്നത് പോലെ ഒരു മുണ്ടും ഷർട്ടുമാണ് സാറിൻ്റെ വേഷം ഞങ്ങളെ പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത്. അതിന് മുമ്പ് എന്തായിരുന്നു എന്ന് എനിക്കറിയില്ല. ഏതായാലും ഞങ്ങളെ പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്ന വളരെ സൗമ്യനായ ഒരു അധ്യാപകൻ, കുട്ടികളുമായി വളരെ സൗഹൃദത്തോടു കൂടി പെരുമാറുന്നത്. എനിക്ക് അത്തരം ഓർമ്മകളുള്ളത് വ്യക്തിപരമായ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ കൊണ്ട് കൂടിയിട്ടാണ്. എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു പ്രശ്നം ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ സാറിനോട് ചെന്ന് പേഴ്സണലായിട്ട് പറയാമെങ്കിൽ വളരെ പെട്ടെന്ന് തന്നെ അത് പരിഹരിക്കപ്പെടും. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് വൈകി വന്നതിൻ്റെ പേരിൽ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ കയറ്റാതെ വരുന്ന സന്ദർഭങ്ങളിലോ മറ്റോ നേരെ ഞാനത് എൻ്റെ ഒരു ഓർമ്മയിലുള്ള ഒരു സംഭവം. അതുകൊണ്ട് അപ്പോൾ സാറ് ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിൽ നിന്ന് കൂടെ വന്ന് ക്ലാസ്സിലേക്ക് കയറ്റി വിട്ട ഒരു മെമ്മറി ഉണ്ട്. എന്ത് കുസൃതി ഒപ്പിച്ചിട്ടാണെന്നൊന്നും എനിക്ക് ഓർമ്മയില്ല. എന്തായാലും ഒന്ന് വൈകി വന്നു എന്നുള്ളൊരു യാഥാർത്ഥ്യം. അപ്പം ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു വരുന്നത്, ഇത്തരത്തിൽ ഒരു 30-35 വർഷം മുൻപ് ഒരു അധ്യാപകരിൽ നിന്ന്, കോളേജ് പ്രൊഫസേഴ്സ് എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് അത്രയും ഒരു ഇൻറ്റിമസി അക്കാലത്ത് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു എന്നൊക്കെ സംശയമുണ്ട്. ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നിരിക്കാം ചിലരെയൊക്കെ സംബന്ധിച്ച്. പക്ഷെ അതിനെയൊക്കെ അതിജീവിച്ച് ചില മുഖങ്ങൾ മനസ്സിൽ വരുന്നതിലൊന്ന് ഇതൊരു കെ ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറിൻ്റെ ആണ്. ഇതൊരു ഭാഗ്യമായിട്ട് പിന്നീട് ഞാനിവിടെ പഠിപ്പിക്കാൻ വരുമ്പോഴും എന്നെ പഠിപ്പിച്ച അധ്യാപകർ ഇവിടെയുണ്ട്. പല സന്ദർഭങ്ങളിലും വാക്കുകളിലൂടെയും നോട്ടങ്ങളിലൂടെയും അവർ തരുന്ന ഒരു പിന്തുണ നമ്മളെ പലപ്പോഴും അതിശയിപ്പിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ഒരുപക്ഷെ നമ്മുടെ വിശ്വാസമനുസരിച്ച് സ്വർഗത്തിൽ നിന്ന് കെ ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാർ ഉൾപ്പെടെയുള്ള അധ്യാപകർ നമ്മെ സന്തോഷിപ്പിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അനുഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പം ഈ അടുത്ത കാലത്ത് ചെറിയ ചില വിഷയങ്ങളുമായിട്ടൊക്കെ ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് വരുമ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് നമ്മുടെ അധ്യാപകരുടെ, ഇക്കണോമിക്സിലെയും മലയാളത്തിലെയും അധ്യാപകരുടെ വിളികൾ എത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ട്, ആശ്വാസ വാക്കുകൾ എത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. ചില ആരോപണങ്ങൾ വരുന്ന സമയത്ത് ഞാൻ തന്നെ ആലോചിച്ചിട്ടില്ലാത്ത ചില ആരോപണങ്ങൾ തന്നെ എനിക്കെതിരെ വരുമ്പോൾ, പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് ഇക്കണോമിക്സ് ആണ് BA എന്ന് പഠിക്കുന്നത് ഭയങ്കര ഒരു തെറ്റായിട്ടൊക്കെ ആളുകൾ ചൂണ്ടിക്കാണിക്കാനൊക്കെ തുടങ്ങിയിരുന്നു. ഇത് കോടതിയിൽ വരെ എത്തി. കോടതിയിൽ തന്നെ ഈ വിഷയം വന്നിട്ട് BA ഇക്കണോമിക്സ് ആയിരുന്നു എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു. അപ്പോഴേക്ക് ഞാൻ അന്വേഷിച്ചപ്പോൾ കേരളത്തിലെ ഒട്ടുമിക്ക ആളുകളും ഇക്കണോമിക്സും ഒക്കെ പഠിച്ചവരാണ്. ഈ മലയാളത്തിൽ വന്നിട്ടുള്ള ON കുറിപ്പ് ഇക്കണോമിക്സ് ആയിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ MK സാനുമാഷ് സുവോളജിയാണ് പഠിച്ചത്. ഇവിടെ തന്നെ ഇസ്താഖ് സാറും സ്കറിയ സക്കറിയ സാറും വേറെ വിഷയത്തിൽ നിന്ന് വന്നു. അപ്പം എനിക്കൊന്ന് രഞ്ജൻ ഫിലോസഫിയാണ് തോന്നുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഇങ്ങനെ ധാരാളം ആൾക്കാർ നമ്മുടെ ഒരു ലിസ്റ്റ് എടുത്തിട്ട്, ലീലാവതി ടീച്ചർ ഉൾപ്പെടെ, MN വിജയൻ ഉൾപ്പെടെ, സുകുമാർ അഴീക്കോട് കൊമേഴ്സാണ് പഠിച്ചത്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ ലിസ്റ്റെല്ലാം കൂടെ കൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ അഡ്വക്കേറ്റിന് കൊടുക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് ആ സമയത്താണ് ഞാൻ ഇത്രയധികം ആളുകൾ, കേരളത്തിലെ മലയാളത്തിലെ പ്രമുഖരായ ഒട്ടേറെ ആളുകൾ നമ്മുടെ മുമ്പിൽ ഈ പല വിഷയങ്ങൾ പഠിച്ചിട്ട് മലയാളത്തിലേക്ക് വന്നിട്ട് പ്രവർത്തിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടെന്ന് അറിയുന്നത്. എനിക്ക് വലിയൊരു സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. ഇതൊക്കെ പ്രസൻറ്റ് ചെയ്തിരുന്നു, ആവശ്യം വന്നില്ല, ആ വിധിയിലതൊന്നും വന്നിട്ടില്ല. പക്ഷേ ഈ കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ അവിടെ പ്രസൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് ആദ്യമൊക്കെ ഈ BA ഇക്കണോമിക്സിൽ നിന്ന് ചേർന്നതല്ലേ എന്നുള്ളൊരു പ്രയാസം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അത് ഫസ്റ്റ് ഇയറിൽ തന്നെ മാറിക്കിട്ടി. കാരണം മലയാളം ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഫാക്കൽറ്റിയിൽ ഒരു വലിയ പ്രത്യേകതയുള്ളത്, ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഫാക്കൽറ്റിയിൽ ഒട്ടുമിക്ക ആളുകൾ MAക്ക് പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ ബുദ്ധിജീവികളായി മാറുകയാണ്. വേറെ ഒരു കോഴ്സിനും അത്ര ഒരു ആനുകൂല്യമില്ല. ഇത് കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു ലിമിറ്റഡ് പേഴ്സ്പെക്റ്റീവിലാണ്, ലോക്കൽ പേഴ്സ്പെക്റ്റീവിലാണ് ഞാനിത് പറയുന്നത്. കാരണം ഇതൊരു വിമർശനമായിട്ട് കൂടി എടുക്കുന്നത്. കാരണം അങ്ങനെ ഒരു ആലോചന കവികളും സാഹിത്യകാരന്മാരും ഒക്കെ കൂടുന്ന ഒരു വലിയ ഗ്രൂപ്പാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടേത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ അതുപോലെ ബുദ്ധിജീവി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു സ്ട്രാറ്റജിയെയോ സ്ട്രാറ്റത്തെയോ കുറിച്ച് നമുക്കുള്ള ആലോചനകൾ പരിമിതമാണ്. നിങ്ങൾ TT ശ്രീകുമാർ സാറിൻ്റെ മുഖത്തോട്ടൊന്ന് നോക്കണം. വളരെ സിമ്പിളായിട്ടാണ് ഇരിക്കുന്നത്. വീശയൊക്കെ പഠിച്ച് നല്ല കുളിച്ചു സുന്ദരൻ. ഇന്ന് ഇന്ത്യയിലെ തന്നെ ഏറ്റവും പ്രഗത്ഭനായ ഒരു ചിന്തകനായിട്ടാണ്. എനിക്ക് വേറൊരു ആത്മബന്ധം കൂടിയുണ്ട്. സാറ് ചിലപ്പോൾ മറന്നുപോയി. ഈ നമ്മളെ പുസ്തകങ്ങളിലൊക്കെ നമ്മളെ സൈറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് കാണുക എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ആദ്യകാലത്ത് വലിയൊരു ആവേശമാണ്. ആദ്യകാലത്ത് എന്നെ സൈറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് കണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന 3 പ്രമുഖർ, അതിലൊരാൾ TT ശ്രീകുമാറാണ്. സാറിനകത്ത് എന്താ 94-ലൊക്കെയാണ്, 95-ലൊക്കെയാണ്, കേരളീയതയെക്കുറിച്ചുള്ളൊരു പുസ്തകത്തിൽ. വേറൊരാൾ ഹിസ്റ്റോറിയനായിട്ടുള്ള MR രാഘവാര്യർ സാറിൻ്റെ. പിന്നെ ഒരാൾ ഈ MT അൻസാരിയുടെ ഒരു പുസ്തകം, മലബാറിനെ കുറിച്ച് വരുന്നൊരു പുസ്തകത്തിലാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഇതൊക്കെ കാണുമ്പോൾ, അപ്പോൾ അന്ന് എനിക്ക് സത്യത്തിൽ TT ശ്രീകുമാർ സാറിനെ പോലുള്ള ആളുകളോട് തോന്നുന്നു വലിയൊരു ബഹുമാനമാണ്. കാരണം എന്താണെന്ന് ചോദിച്ചാൽ പ്രായത്തിലായാലും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അക്കാഡമിക്സിലായാലും താരതമ്യേന ജൂനിയറായിട്ട് നിൽക്കുന്ന ഒരാളെ സൈറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നു എന്നുള്ള ഒരു കാര്യമുണ്ട്. അപ്പം ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു വരുന്നത് മറ്റൊന്നുമല്ല, യൂറോപ്പിലെയോ അമേരിക്കയിലെയോ സ്കാൻഡിനേവിയൻ രാജ്യങ്ങളിലെയൊക്കെ വളരെ ജീനിയസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഇൻ്റലക്ച്വൽസിനെ നമ്മൾ കണ്ടാൽ അവരൊക്കെ വളരെ മാന്യമായിട്ട് വസ്ത്രധാരണമൊക്കെ ചെയ്ത് വൃത്തിയായിട്ട് ഷേവ് ചെയ്തുമൊക്കെ നടക്കുന്നവരെ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്. പക്ഷെ കേരളത്തിലേക്ക് വരുമ്പോൾ ഇതിൻ്റെ ഗതി മുഴുവൻ മാറുകയാണ്. കേരളത്തിൽ ബുദ്ധിജീവിയാണെങ്കിൽ മുടി നീട്ടി വളർത്തണമെന്നോ, ഒരു സഞ്ചി വേണമെന്നോ, കുളിക്കരുതെന്നോ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മാർക്കറ്റിൽ എവിടെയെങ്കിലും പോയി കിടക്കണമെന്നോ ഒക്കെ ഉള്ളൊരു തോന്നൽ ഇടക്കാലത്ത് ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്. ആ ഒരു ധാരണ വളരെ പ്രബലമായി നിൽക്കുന്ന ഒരു സാഹചര്യം ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഒരു ഫാക്കൽറ്റിയിൽ, ഞാനത് മൊത്തത്തിലല്ല പറയുന്നത്, വളരെ എക്സ്ട്രാ ഓർഡിനറി ആയിട്ടുള്ള ജീനിയസുകളൊക്കെ ഇതിനകത്ത് ഉണ്ടെന്നുള്ളത് ശരിയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് അപ്പം ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത് ഈ ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറിനെ കുറിച്ച്, വീണ്ടും ഞാൻ ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറിലേക്ക് വരാം. സാറിനെ കുറിച്ച് ആലോചിക്കുമ്പോൾ സാറ് ഈ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ വളരെ അച്ചടക്കമുള്ള, ചിന്താപരമായ അച്ചടക്കമുള്ള ഒരാളായിട്ടാണ് എൻ്റെ മനസ്സിൽ നിൽക്കുന്നത്. ഒരു പക്ഷേ പിന്നീട് മലയാളത്തിലേക്ക് പോകുന്നതിന് കാരണമാകുന്നതും പിന്നീട് മലയാളം എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ സാഹിത്യം മാത്രമല്ല, ഭാഷയുടെ ഒരു വഴിയുണ്ട്. ഞാൻ കൂടുതലായിട്ട് തിരഞ്ഞെടുക്കുന്ന ഭാഷയുടെയും ചരിത്രത്തിൻ്റെയും ഒക്കെ വഴികളാണ് കൂടുതലായിട്ടും കൈകാര്യം ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പം ലിറ്ററേച്ചറിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഈസ്തറ്റിക് ഡൊമൈൻ വിട്ടിട്ട് അതിൻ്റെ സോഷ്യോളജിയുടെയും മറ്റുമൊക്കെ ഒരു ഡൊമൈനിൽ കൂടുതൽ ആലോചിക്കാൻ നിർബന്ധിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു കഥ വായിച്ചാൽ അതിൻ്റെ സോഷ്യോളജിക്കൽ ആസ്പെക്റ്റിനെ കുറിച്ച് ചിന്തിക്കാൻ, സൈക്കോളജിക്കൽ ആസ്പെക്റ്റിനെ കുറിച്ച് ചിന്തിക്കാൻ, നോവൽ വായിക്കുമ്പോൾ, കവിത വായിക്കുമ്പോൾ ഒക്കെ ഒരു പ്രചോദനമായി വന്നത് ഒരു പക്ഷേ SB കോളേജിലെ ഇക്കണോമിക്സിലെ വിദ്യാഭ്യാസവും ഡോക്ടർ കെ ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാർ ഉൾപ്പെടെയുള്ള ഇക്കണോമിക്സിലെ അധ്യാപകരുടെ പ്രചോദനവുമാണ് എന്നാണ് ഞാൻ സ്വയം വിചാരിക്കുന്നത്. പിന്നീട് എന്തെങ്കിലുമൊക്കെ പ്രവർത്തിക്കാനുള്ള ഊർജ്ജം, ഇതിനൊക്കെ ഒരു എയർടൈറ്റ് കമ്പാർട്ട്മെൻ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന തരത്തിലൊന്നുമില്ല. ഈ അറിവിൻ്റെ ലോകം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന കുറേ കൂടി കൊണ്ടും കൊടുത്തും വളരുന്ന ഒരു ലോകമാണ്. അതിനങ്ങനെ ഒരു പാസേജിൽ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഇപ്പോൾ ശ്രീകുമാർ സാർ തന്നെ ഇവിടെ ഒരു 3 ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിൽ പരിപാടിക്ക് വന്നിട്ടുണ്ടാവും തോന്നുന്നു, 3-4 ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിൽ വന്നിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. നമുക്കങ്ങനെ ലിമിറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല. നമ്മളെ ലിമിറ്റ് ചെയ്യുക എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഈ അറിവിൻ്റെ കാര്യത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ സങ്കുചിതരായി മാറുന്നു എന്നാണ് അതിൻ്റെ അർത്ഥം. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിനകത്ത് ഇപ്പോൾ ഭാഷയെക്കുറിച്ച് ഇപ്പോൾ ഈ ഫണ്ടമെൻ്റലിസം എന്നൊക്കെ പറയും, ഒരു തരത്തിൽ ഫണ്ടമെൻ്റലിസ്റ്റായി മാറുകയാണ്. അറിവിൻ്റെ കാര്യത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ ഫണ്ടമെൻ്റലിസ്റ്റായി മാറുകയാണ്. നമ്മുടെ ഡൊമൈൻ മാത്രമാണ് ശരിയെന്നും അവിടെ മാത്രമാണ് വിജ്ഞാനം ഇങ്ങനെ ഒളിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നതെന്നും ആ വിജ്ഞാനം മാത്രമാണ് വിജ്ഞാനമെന്നും ഒക്കെ പറയുന്നത് വലിയൊരു തെറ്റിദ്ധാരണയാണ്. അങ്ങനെയല്ല, കൊണ്ടും കൊടുത്തും വളരുന്ന ഒരു വലിയ ജ്ഞാന പദ്ധതിയായി നമ്മളിതിനെ സങ്കല്പിച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അതിൻ്റെ പുറകിൽ, ഞാൻ ഇന്നലെ മത്തായി സാറുമായിട്ട് സംസാരിച്ചിരുന്നു വൈകിട്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഞാനിങ്ങനെ പോകുന്നെന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ മത്തായി സാറ് പറഞ്ഞത് 1960-61 എന്നെ പഠിപ്പിച്ചതാണ് കെ ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറെന്ന്. TJ മത്തായി സാറ് ഞങ്ങളുടെ സീനിയർ പ്രൊഫസറാണ് മലയാളത്തിൽ. അപ്പോൾ 89-90 എന്നെ പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്നു. ഇതെല്ലാം ഒരുതരം ഒരു നിയോഗത്തിൻ്റെയോ ഒക്കെ ഒരു സ്വഭാവമുണ്ട്. എന്തായാലും ഇങ്ങനെ ചിന്നിച്ചിതറിയ രീതിയിൽ കുറേ കാര്യങ്ങൾ പറയാൻ മാത്രമേ എനിക്ക് ഈ സമയത്ത് കഴിയുന്നുള്ളൂ. എനിക്ക് ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു അവസരം ലഭിച്ചതിന് നന്ദി. കെ ഫ്രാൻസിസ് സാറിൻ്റെ ഓർമ്മകൾക്ക് മുമ്പിൽ നമിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് എൻ്റെ വാക്കുകൾ അവസാനിപ്പിക്കുന്നു. നന്ദി, നമസ്കാരം.
Even 20 years ago, I remember St. Bergman's College giving me an occasion to give a talk. And that was indeed outside of the campus at the Maman Mapla Hall. And later on, as Professor Skaria pointed out, I've had the privilege to talk at the Malayalam department and also at the English department at the invitation of Professor Thomas, who is also here. And now again, I'm coming back to economics department. In fact, the first invitation was from Department of Economics. So that means I have had a long association with SB College, and besides, these formal associations, many of the students of SB College and many of the faculty members in other departments as well, like Professor Istak, has been like a guru for me in my intellectual formation in my younger days. I have had the kind of privilege to associate with Professor Istak from my school days onwards. He was my uncle's neighbor. And then I have had a very brief but very intense interaction with Professor Istak in the initial stages of my own, kind of intellectual evolution. And many of his ideas and ideals have been instrumental in shaping my own perspectives, worldviews, etc. later on. In fact, Professor I. Isaac Maraka Samadhi has brought out a new volume of his articles in which I was invited to write the introduction, which I happily did. So in that sense, my association with this esteemed institution is like a rhizome. It branches out in several directions, and I hope that this friendships, these collaborations will continue in future also. And I know very painfully that this is a moment of grief for this institution. The sad departure of Bishop Mar Pavathil has been a great shock to the institution and public at large. When I remember the contributions of Bishop Mar Pavathil, another name that comes to my mind is actually about John Henry Newman. John Henry Newman was also a Catholic priest. I mean, he had a stint with Anglican Church also in between, but he came back to Catholic Church later on. He has written an extremely interesting book called The Idea of the University. In that book, Idea of the University, what Henry Newman, I mean, actually this Todupuzha Newman College, probably known for other reasons, is actually named after John Henry Newman. One of the ideals that he proposed is that an education is actually a liberal enterprise. Religion perhaps will have a role in it, but then it is marginal. It is not the central concern of an educational institution. I mean, he was criticized by some other priests for saying this also, but he wrote this essay, this book called Idea of the University, in which he upheld the principle of liberal education, where you allow other perspectives also to prosper and have an intellectual, kind of a collaboration among multiple individuals who probably will have different perspectives and ideologies. So St. Bergman's College, in fact, was privileged to have a person like Bishop Mar Joseph Pavathil as its patron for a long time, who, although he had strong ideologies, strong political beliefs and religious focus in his personal endeavors, he allowed multiple perspectives to flourish within the college and allowed the faculty and the students of this university, this college, to interact with individuals and groups which held very different ideological positions in the past. Otherwise, a person like me would never have been invited to a college, which is known for a certain kind of religious focus that it otherwise holds. So liberal education as a central piece of his kind of perspective, worldview, is something that I think St. Bergman's is a great legacy that St. Bergman's College is inheriting. So I also join you in your hour of grief and irreplaceable loss of Professor Joseph Mar Pavathil. Coming to Professor K.K. Francis, I unfortunately did not have the privilege to be his student or even familiar with him during the time when he was a professor here. Later on, I had very emotional, kind of an association with him through his children. K.K. Francis' son, Shaji Francis, was a bosom friend of mine, and he was my hostel mate in Center for Development Studies. His untimely death was a great shock to all of us. Philip, I think, would remember Shaji Francis. He was also a kind of great intellectual who could think about the society and economy of Kerala. His work on agricultural laborers in Kuttanad is one of the path-breaking works even now. It is even now quoted by others. I mean, when they talk about Kuttanad and Kuttanad's political struggles of agricultural workers. And he anticipated in his work the current scenario of the problems that Kuttanad faces in terms of its workforce and the management of capital there, about mechanization and various other things. I mean, there are very insightful observations that Shaji Francis has made in his MPhil thesis that was submitted to Jawaharlal Nehru University through Center for Development Studies. And Dr. Smita Francis, who is also a very close friend of mine, who actually delivered the Professor K.K. Francis Memorial lecture last time. In fact, like when she came to know that I am coming here, immediately she contacted me over the phone, sent messages and said that, she would not be able to come, but then, she would listen to it later. So today also, in fact, like she was messaging me, she is unwell and recovering from viral fever. So the kind of emotional closeness that I feel to Professor K.K. Francis through the bosom friendship of his children is one, kind of immediate, thing that comes to my mind when I stand here to speak as in memory of in memory of Professor K.K. Francis. Today, as you know, I have taken up this topic of platform capitalism and its relationship to democracy. The stage for my presentation is already set by Professor Quirian, Father Quirian, when he mentioned the intricate relationship between capitalism and democracy when it comes to understanding freedom as a concept. One of the things, let me start by kind of quoting one of the things that he mentioned in his short speech, that the idea of the freedom emerged with the wake of capitalism. Before capitalism, there wasn't any concept of freedom anywhere in the world. The way in which we understand freedom. Because before capitalism, under the feudal regime, this is very important to understand this fundamental aspect. Before capitalism, under feudalism, the sovereign power was so supreme that no individual had any freedom of sort other than what the sovereign is providing. On the other hand, capitalism emerged as an ideology of freedom, but freedom in a different sense. It said that, and that is precisely why this is important for economists to reiterate and remember this whole history. Capitalism understood the satisfaction of human needs as a domain outside the control of the sovereign. If you want to buy something, if you want to consume something, if you want to produce something and sell in the market, you should have the freedom to do it. The sovereign has absolutely nothing to do with your individual preferences and your satisfaction of needs. They understood this as the civil society. And for the first time, an idea of the civil society outside of the sovereign's supremacy emerged with the emergence of capitalism. Because capitalists at that time believed that we ought to have the freedom to decide. So the autonomous individual, the self-determining individual, the liberal individual, that concept became very important only with the arrival of the advent of capitalism. And before that, this concept was not there. And that is very important when we now, kind of try to discuss the relationship between the new kinds of capitalism that are emerging and the kind of democracies that are in the offer for the future. One of the reasons why this becomes extremely important for us is because when concepts like platform capitalism are discussed, particularly from the point of view of economics, some of the political aspects of this concept is largely ignored. There is a need to, kind of look at more comprehensively and more coherently into some of these economic categories, because economic categories are not understood in an isolation. It is not actually understood outside of the realm of politics. In fact, the whole, disciplinary nomenclature for economics was political economy to begin with. Only later it changed to economics. It was called political economy. In fact, that was one of the major contributions of Karl Marx, to have provided a criticism of political economy. I mean, people normally, when you are asked about the magnum opus of Karl Marx, which is the major work of Karl Marx, everyone will say Das Kapital. But there is a subtitle to the subcapital, which is Critique of Political Economy. Critique of political economy. Why was Marx trying to criticize political economy is actually important for us to remember in the present day context also. Because political economy as such was an ideology of capitalism, in the sense that it was trying to explain the way in which capitalism as a process unfolds itself. It had its own theories. It had its own theories of value. It had its own theories of distribution. It has its own theories of division of labor. If you look at Adam Smith's work, Marx was actually trying to provide a critique of the ideology of capitalism, which is political economy. So political economy works in two ways. One is that it is presented to us as a theory of free market, which is capitalism. Whereas Marx understood that it is not an innocent theory of free market or capitalism, whereas on the other hand, it is actually providing a legitimacy to the theories of the way in which capitalism works in the society. The relationship is very clear. That relationship between the ideology of capitalism and the working of capitalism was brought under the scanner by Karl Marx in his book, Das Kapital. And that is actually very important for us to remember. And then, in later years, also, sometimes, people say that, Nobel Prize is given to economists who actually help, the capitalist crisis to be overcome. And some of the theories that they provide becomes the ideology of global capitalism, etc. In fact, I am actually invoking this particular old example in this talk precisely because of the reason that I think in the explanations provided by platform capitalism by many scholars, including one of the major, proponents of the concept of critique of the concept of platform capitalism, Nick Cernysek. He also gives a detailed explanation of how, platform capitalism works, but does not go into the political, economic, and political economy and political history of how capitalism came into shape. So this is a kind of lacuna in the literature which I think would mention in this lecture, so that a more comprehensive, at least from my own humble, a kind of perspective, a more comprehensive and coherent understanding of platform capitalism could be provided. Platform capitalism was probably, you all know, was made possible by the digital technologies and the Web 2.0 technologies from 90s onwards, 1990s onwards. It basically thrives on the idea that value can be created through networks and collaborations. If value can be created through networks and collaboration, the way in which capitalism extracts value, the methods through which capitalism extracts value changes tremendously. There are 4 kinds of platform capitalism that Cernysek is talking about. One is actually, I think, he talks about, the advertisement platforms, about which we are all very familiar. I mean, like Facebook, Google, and then various other things. I mean, they are called advertising platforms. I mean, you think that they are actually providing you, space to share your personal views and perspectives, photos, stories, and videos, and all those things. And they are basically advertising platforms. If you look at YouTube, you know that like every 5 minutes, every 3 minutes, when you watch a video, advertisement pops up, and that is actually the way in which the company is creating value from your involvement in your personal entertainment. So the idea that a value can be produced from the leisure time that individuals have is one of the major foundations of platform capitalism. And then there are these other kinds of like industrial platforms like General Electric and Siemens, which also use this network effects and also kind of various other platforms for their value creation. And then there are product platforms like Rolls-Royce and others. And then there is this lean platforms like Uber. Uber, you all use Uber and Airbnb. How do they actually use technology is a very, very interesting kind of exercise. The Uber actually stores all its data with Amazon Web Service. It sends email through this Braintree. His payments are made in another platform, Twilio. texting. For texting, it is using payment, and then it uses Google Map for its routing. And it also uses, kind of a very ironical name, Apache Kafka, which is actually a software for, kind of extracting data and storing data and things like that. They use the Kafka platform also. So in platform capitalism, it's a very unique kind of a capitalism that has emerged, which actually thrives on extracting, use or churning or making into value the behavioral data, the experiential data that we are providing in different platforms like Facebook, Google, YouTube, or wherever. Every click that you make, as you know, is actually turned into a useful data for what? For profiling individuals and also giving it for advertisement. And that is how they kind of create value. So this has been independently studied. I mean, there is a surveillance, kind of capitalism, which is, kind of examined separately. And then we examine platform capitalism in isolation from that. What I am trying to say here is that these are not two interrelated things. In fact, the surveillance capitalism and platform capitalism are more or less one and the same thing. It might appear as two different things for you, but it is one and the same. And there are national and international processes that help the coming together of platform capitalism and surveillance capitalism, which actually becomes a kind of threat to democracy in multiple ways. So if you look at the history of platform capitalism, how could capitalism transform into platform capitalism? There is a very interesting story behind it, and that it all starts not with the 90s or kind of initial years of the new millennium, but much before that. And that story has to be told in order to understand platform capitalism. After the post-war period, most of the students of economics would know that there was a global trend towards what we call welfare state. What we call welfare state. Welfare state is a very interesting kind of a form of governance in which a lot of subsidies are provided, a lot of unemployment doles are provided to the unemployed. There are welfare measures given to several weaker sections of the people, and then there are positive discrimination given to marginalized communities at different parts of the world. Immediately after the post-World War, there was actually a tendency to shift towards welfare state in most capitalist countries also. And there was a reason behind that. I mean, in 1917, you all know that there was a communist revolution in Soviet Union. It survived only for 70 years. It collapsed. We have in many articles and books read why it collapsed and how it worked, the way in which like it was a threat to freedom and democracy, etc., etc. We are all familiar with. But then capitalism understood this economic phenomenon of socialism in a very different way. Of course, it was an ideological threat, but more than that, what was capitalism's problem with socialism? There were two major problems of socialism, of capitalism with socialism. One is that it was a threat to individualism. It is a threat to individualism because when you call something dictatorship of the proletariat, I mean, it's a kind of faceless it's a faceless kind of governance where there is a majority is supposed to be ruling you, but there is a way in which this majority is represented in the government through the one-party system. Because capital class allows multiple parties to flourish in a liberal democracy. They are not worried actually. I mean, recently there is discussion about whether BJP or Congress is better for bourgeois democrary in India and also for the capitalists. And they say that there is actually the whole. I mean, even Yechuri was recently saying that like Indian capital class shifted its loyalty to the Indian bourgeoisie. The Indian bourgeoisie shifted its loyalty to BJP. Together. But what I am trying to say is that this is not the way in which, for example, capitalism understands liberal democracy. If Congress is able to defeat BJP and come to power, then Congress will represent the class interest naturally. So it is not the party, but the conduit is through liberal democracy. The conduit through which capitalism establishes its hegemony, perpetuates its hegemony, is actually through liberal democracy. So the first threat to liberal democracy ever in in world history, practical threat came from the socialist revolution in Soviet Union, because that actually dislodged liberal democracy completely and put in place an entirely different social experiment, which was not known to humanity until then. I mean, people say, though, it was a corrupt version of Marxism, etc. Maybe. But what I'm trying to say is that it was a new social experiment. And in this social experiment, they had a political project. Their political project, whether you believe in it or not, that's a different thing, is to provide security to everyone, social security to everyone, to provide food for everyone, provide education for everyone. And this was actually not a concern of capitalism. Even when Adam Smith was writing Wealth of Nations, when he said that, it is laissez-faire, state should not interfere in the day-to-day affairs of the economy and society, one particular sector he isolated out, saying that, this particular sector needs state support. Do you know which sector was that? That was education. He said, if state is not subsidizing education, then this is not a Marx question. This is actually the question raised by Adam Smith. He said that if state is withdrawing from subsidizing education, then who will pay for the education of workers, the proletariat? This question was not asked by Marx. So he said that state should intervene in education, support education, because otherwise workers' children cannot study. This was Adam Smith's, because he was not just an economist. I mean, he was a philosopher. He wrote, like theories of moral sentiments, for example, a philosophical, important philosophical book. So this particular, political project of socialism was actually a threat. Second thing is that liberal democracy always upholds the autonomy of the individual. The individual becomes an anonymous face in socialism. You are not really identified as an individual. You are actually subservient to a larger monolithic state where everybody is supposed to be equal. So these were actually the major two threats, and they wanted to prevent a similar society emerging elsewhere in Europe. One of the things that they thought ideal in practicing this opposition to socialism is bringing in a kind of economy where people's welfare is taken care of. Trade unions are contained. Their rights are granted. There is to give a feeling to, majority of the people that the state is there to support you, to take care of you when you are in trouble. This particular ideology of the welfare state became very prominent in the 50s. And that is precisely why in the 1950s, when India began planning, Jawaharlal Nehru was actually in favor of having this mixed economy and also providing opportunity to all. And then Indian welfare state was a unique thing because of the intervention of Dr. Ambedkar. Ambedkar put forward this idea that giving just opportunities is not enough. The access to opportunities is very important. And that is why he introduced the whole idea of reservation. The theory of justice that lies behind India's welfare state is not just a European concept. It is a Nehruvian concept supplemented by Ambedkarian idea. That is why it is unique in the world. For example, I will come to this in a while. When John Rawls wrote the book Theory of Justice, it was widely appreciated, and then people like Amartya Sen had early criticism of this work also. But then in 2009, in the idea of justice, Amartya Sen took a relook into the Rawlsian concept of justice. And then he was actually saying that mere, allotment of primary goods is not enough. Access to the primary goods is more important, which is actually the point that Ambedkar made in his work. It's a purely Ambedkarian concept, although Amartya Sen does not directly quote Ambedkar. It's a purely Ambedkarian concept. I mean, the access to resources is more important, is as important as providing, kind of resources. So people should be able to use it. So this welfare state concept emerged globally and also in India and other, kind of newly developed countries at that time, which is very interesting for us to remember. But then In 1970, but then the capitalists were not very happy about it. I mean, although it was actually a capitalist ideology of the welfare state, they were not very happy about it. But in 1973, what happened was that there was this global depression, global oil shock. And then they began to criticize this concept of the welfare state, saying that capital does not have the freedom to do what it wants, and that is actually the root cause of this problem. And that was actually the moment of the emergence of what we now call neoliberalism. People like Hayek and Nozick and various other economists and social thinkers began to criticize the welfare state concept, because it was in the 60s, if John Rawls could write theory of justice, that was precisely because there was a concept of welfare state already put in place. This was to actually supplement the ideological repertoire of welfare state capitalism, that theory of justice and many other texts were produced during the time. And in fact, immediately after theory of justice, 3 years after theory of justice, Anarchy, State and Utopia by Robert Nozick came, Hayek and other people. And one of the things that I reiterate in many of my discussions is that this is a moment that missed many Marxist philosophers, historians of 1970s, except one person, who is Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault understood that there is something serious happening at the global level. In his 1978 lectures on birth of biopolitics, many people quote, Birth of Biopolitics as a path-breaking work by Foucault. But what is the content of this book? Of the 12 chapters, 8 chapters are devoted to a discussion of neoliberalism. And he discusses deeply the neoliberalism of Germany and neoliberalism of United States separately. He is going into the disaggregated analysis of neoliberalism in his book. 8 chapters are devoted for discussion of neoliberalism in Birth of Biopolitics. And then he engaged with economists like Gary Becker, and various other neoliberal economists in the 1970s itself. Foucault understood this as a radical transition in governance at the global level, which capitalism is actually going to pick up later on. In the 70s, it was only in the horizon ideologically, neoliberalism. Only with early 80s, when Thatcher in United Kingdom and Reagan in United States embraced neoliberalism, it became the ideology of global capitalism. It became the ideology of global capitalism. And this is very important to remember, that neoliberalism becoming the ideology of global capitalism had a tremendous subsequent influence on the way in which capital shaped itself, and also shaped technological development thereafter. Sometimes we don't really understand the ideological background of some of the technological developments. How these new technological developments in the digital domain and in the domain of biotechnology became popular is by redefining the rules of the game of the global economic order. In fact, the Dungle draft, about which many seniors here would actually remember, there were a lot of struggles against Dungle draft in various third world countries, in which the World Trade Organization and World Bank provided us with a very new neoliberal set of ideas and concepts to work with in our everyday governance, the structural adjustment program and various other things. They were actually trying to redefine the rules of global capitalism in a particular direction where patent rights are massively, kind of redefined, the way in which capital flows are regulated, the way in which labor is managed, the way in which product cycles are managed. Unless this particular economic restructuring happened, there was no possibility for process like platform capitalism could emerge. So this is anticipated. I mean, the future direction of capitalism was anticipated in the early 80s, not exactly in the 90s and 2000s. They provided the framework for platform capitalism to emerge. Because one of the interesting criticism of platform capitalism is like Google, Apple, Facebook, and all those people, they dodge taxes in several countries by relocating their firms in countries where there is, the countries as havens, tax havens, where there is more freedom for them to use. How is this made possible? It was not made possible in the rules of the game that were in place under capitalist regime in the 1970s. Only after the 1980s restructuring this is possible. Before that, it is not possible. The kind of capital flow, the kind of outsourcing that they do, all these things were made possible before digital technology, in fact, arrived in the horizon to provide the practical possibilities of outsourcing, capital, flight, post-Fordist labor management, and various other things. So there was actually a global planning for the emergence of what we now call digital capitalism. And then at that point of time, there was also the convergence of two things, a complementary convergence of two things. One is that on the one hand, digital technology is progressing, on the other hand, genetic technology is also, biotechnology is also progressing. There is a complementarity between these two. And these two technologies particularly wanted a freer global economic order, other than the one that the welfare state and the protectionist state was providing. Even the liberal state was providing. So before the digital technology could be commercialized, and you all know that digital technologies were commercialized later, but it was produced by NASA much before that. The internet technology and many other technologies was already there. That was not commercialized. They commercialized it only after restructuring the global economy. And that is the most important aspect. Only after global economy became a neoliberal economy that they commercialized the internet technologies. Until then, they did not. This connection is not often understood. This connection is not often talked about. The connection between neoliberalism and emergence of platform and digital capitalism. And this is very important. And then what does this entail? I mean, the whole development of digital technology on the one hand and biotechnology on the other, like genetic technology. In fact, one of the early scholars who got worried, in fact, in my lecture with the English department, I think I mentioned Habermas's work, Future of Human Nature, in which, in Future of Human Nature, Habermas is actually a Marxist philosopher, but he is actually looking at it from a very religious perspective. Where is the genetic technology going to take us? What is the ethics behind genetic technology? But on the other hand, platform capitalism is not worried about the ethics of genetic technology anymore. They are using all the possibilities available to us through digital technology to redefine the contours of genetic technology. And many global states are now very liberal about experiments in genetic technology and DNA. And this is actually a very important kind of change that has happened at the global level, facilitated by this fundamental structural change that was brought about in the early 80s. And then with the development of digital technologies, immediately they were also able to use a very different source of value, which is actually our own individual behavior. As I was telling you earlier, digital capitalism thrives by making value out of networks and also our own individual behavior, experiential behavior. One of the recent kind of examples about this is that the kind of data that they use and how it is going to and it is used to produce value. There is a very interesting book by Mariana Mazzucato on value, how these companies actually kind of extract value and create value. And this book is a very prominent one. It is actually appreciated by people on various walks of life. And I will just tell you, one particular thing. This particular book was actually one that was highly appreciated by Pope Francis. He said that she provides, Mariana Mazzucato provides the future of our world in her book. And then it was also appreciated by people like Jaydeep Ghosh, who was previously given a lecture here as a Marxist philosopher. If a Marxist economist and Pope Francis can appreciate a single book, then you can imagine that that book has got some worth for us to discuss it. They come from two different, kind of spectrum of our life. So the way in which capitalism is actually extracting value through our personal, kind of endeavors every day. You actually put a status in Facebook. I'm trying to make it very, very simple. Like I always say this. I mean, if you don't actually update your status in Facebook for 3 days, not just you, everyone in the world, the company cannot survive on the 4th day. It's out. If you don't update your status, if you don't put up anything in Facebook for 3 days, that company is gone. So much of the reliance depends on the personal contribution. Sometime earlier it was seen as unpaid labor, but now it is not really unpaid labor that they are actually, kind of looking at. They are, in fact, making a behavioral change in our attitude to society, in our attitude to ethics. You are actually sharing something that is very personal in the public domain, things that you never used to actually share with anybody else. What you ate for breakfast, for example, was not a concern for anybody else. But now, after eating idli or before eating idli, you can take a photograph of the idlis and say that nice idlis my mama has prepared and put it in a Facebook and take likes and comments for it. Who benefits from it? Of course, you benefit because many friends know that you ate idli and there is no value for you. Or the people who comment there, nice, oof, great. Let me also join for breakfast tomorrow, etc., etc. They can comment under your Facebook post. But then, just because you post your idli, there is someone who is benefiting from it. It is Mark Zuckerberg. His value is based on these idli photos that you post in Facebook to make it simple. But is it as simple as that? Is the question that we want to pose. So, from a very rather innocent posting of your idli plate in Facebook to the larger political questions that we want to discuss in the context of political in a platform capitalism is that spectrum that we are actually going to kind of examine here. You know that like at the global level there has been this processes that define the global order in a very different way. So there are 3 important points that I want to make with respect to the relationship between platform capitalism, this kind of extraction of private data, and a democracy at large. One is the kind of economic consequences of this. I tell you, one of the most important economic consequences of platform capitalism is that the way in which it has restructured global labor market. And this is not a worry of any trade union. I mean, this is actually the worry of global capitalist countries also. Last year, they talked by Smita here on 4th Industrial Revolution. She was actually trying to focus mostly on the kind of Indian experience with 4th Industrial Revolution in the manufacturing sector, if I remember correctly. But there are other aspects to 4th Industrial Revolution. The 4th Industrial Revolution is a technological revolution, which is very different from the kind of technological revolution that we have seen in the past. Technological revolutions invariably will displace labor, that everybody knows. Any new technological revolution will invariably displace labor. That is an imperative of technological development. But then, those technological developments will create labor in different sectors later on. So it is basically a macroeconomic dislocation, which is a very brief one in the global historical sense. Later on, new jobs will be created. And for example, now people criticize communist parties for disallowing computerization in the initial phase, opposing computerization. Their basic question that they raised was that computerization would displace labor. But then at that time, for example, they failed to anticipate that computer technology could generate employment in multiple other sectors and there could be a global macro restructuring. The people who are displaced will be displaced, but then they will get some other job somewhere. Some of them. I mean, no technological revolution happens without causing pain to a large number of people globally. I mean, that is capitalism is not really bothered about it. But then This particular technological revolution is a very different type. It is actually creating artificial intelligence and robotics and cyborgs, where human labor is increasingly being replaced by automated labor. And that automated labor is again creating technologies that will further take away the jobs. And this is like, have you seen Endiran, the Rajinikanth film? The Endiran Rajinikanth film has a very funny climax. I mean, like thousands and thousands of Endirans are produced by the same Endiran. I don't know whether he, in fact, saw this future of AI when he was making Endiran, but then that actually is a typical scenario that is emerging now at the global level. But there is actually, there's a huge difference as well. Father was right to mention about ChatGPT in his wonderful brief introduction. One of the things what ChatGPT is doing, the recent kind of study by University of Pennsylvania, is that it is actually going to make many jobs which are carried out by humans vulnerable. We know it, but then it has already been done. Many jobs are being exposed. European Union is worried about it. United States of America is worried about it. World Bank is worried about it. This is happening because of the fourth industrial revolution. Everybody understands this. But then now, in Ajay Agarwal's book, he very clearly says that an industry has popped up which looks at the disaggregation of task by task in every profession. That can be transferred to artificial intelligence. You're taking a much closer look. In one of the chartered accountants, WhatsApp group, an article that was that appeared in Live Mint was immediately shared because they had given a list of jobs that are vulnerable to ChatGPT and the percentage of vulnerability. The chartered accountant's job was having 100% vulnerability. That chartered accountant's job will be taken up by artificial intelligence 100%. There is no need for a chartered accountant anymore. If it happens, I mean, maybe a futuristic scenario, people may be really thinking that is an exaggeration. It could be an exaggeration at the moment. But if you look at the way in which in the last 10 years technology has developed, is there any space for exaggerating these things anymore? Is there any kind of space for us to think that this will not happen? Or this might happen after 20 years, 30 years, or 50 years? No. This can happen on any day. I mean, it can happen tomorrow. It can happen tomorrow. It can happen day after tomorrow. I mean, it's so near. I mean, if you see this as a danger, the danger is already there. It is not something that you are going to face at a later phase in history. It is already there. And this is important. This is a major economic consequence of thing. And what happens? And this has already been there. Sisek was giving a lecture here, I understand, like very recently. One of the very interesting books that Sisek wrote was immediately after the 2008 global depression, about the depression, in which he was actually talking about these bouts of depression that is happening in the first millennium, after 21st century began. Why is this happening? This is happening because capitalism used to have periodic crisis earlier, 15 years, 20 years interval, it used to come. But in the last 20 years, or 23 years, this is 2023, 5 or 6 capitalist depressions have happened. Economic depressions have happened. And global slump. 5 or 6 global slumps have happened. Why? There is a reason why this is happening, and it is very directly related to the development of platform capitalism and the fourth industrial revolution. Because a slump happens when there is relative overproduction. Profit is realized not when the labor produces the commodity, but when it is sold in the market. You need the purchasing power to buy the commodity. Otherwise, profit is not realized. So what now happens is that because of this tremendous unemployment that's being caused, the purchasing power has come down, and there are periodic gluts in the global market. This is precisely why global capitalism is not really bothered, because capitalism thinks about overcoming a crisis not by supporting labor or creating purchasing power, but by inventing new technology. That has been its historical trend. Historical trend has been to amass a relative surplus value rather than absolute surplus value. I mean, that is what capital is all about. But then there is a second kind of economic consequences. There are jobs created by platform capitalism, like Uber drivers, Zomato and Swiggy delivery persons, and various other jobs. Airbnb, for example, creates jobs in various sectors and things like that. The Amazon delivery, persons and things like that. But what is the nature of that employment? Students of economists used to characterize Indian agriculture as having a phenomenon called disguised unemployment. Disguised unemployment it happens when you are not able to get a job relating to your skill. You actually end up doing jobs which does not need the kind of skill that you have. People working with Swiggy, people working with Zomato, people working with Uber, now surveys are being conducted. There are PhD holders doing it. There are masters, students doing it. There is a global restructuring of the global market in which disguised unemployment has become the rule rather than an exception. It has become a rule. So on the one hand, it is producing unemployment, and on the other hand, it is presiding over the disguised unemployment that is emerging as a global phenomenon. It is not confined to any third world country anymore, or global south anymore. It's a global. It's a global phenomenon. And then there are this the flexible labor market in which you can hire and fire anybody at your will. That is also because, again, that was created in the 1980s with the establishment of the new economic order at the global level. The platform capitalism is actually making use of this restructuring of the global economic order that happened in the 1980s at this point. The second thing is that with globalization, there was this talk about nation states becoming insignificant. But what has really happened is not that the nation state became completely insignificant, but nation state was coerced into a new system of platform capitalism where it is supposed to serve certain purposes of platform capitalism. There is a new definition of the relationship between nation state and capitalism, and that is one important aspect where now, like probably people who read newspapers about Indian government trying to control OTT platforms, Twitter, China trying to control Google, America, a kind of summoning Zuckerberg for hearing in the Senate or wherever, might think that, okay, global governments are trying to control the social media and the platforms. Actually, that is not the case. That is actually only an appearance. On the other hand, the rules of the game are set by global capitalism, and they are almost accepted by the global states in WTO. These are only certain violations of that they are looking into. They actually provide this, euphemistic jargons that, we are concerned about ethics, etc. But, they are not really concerned about ethics in a larger sense, because they have already allowed them to exploit value and human nature in a very unique way throughout the last 3 decades, and it is going to continue. But the way in which the relationship between nation state and capitalism is played out at the global level has tremendously changed. So not only the economic consequences, there is a political consequence that is important for us to understand. With the emergence of platform capitalism has mostly forced nation states to toe its own line. So whether there is some control over OTT platforms is very peripheral. It is only at the surface. If you scratch the surface, you can see that there is an intimate relationship between the way in which, that is precisely why, for example, Facebook still functions in India. Google functions in China, irrespective of the kind of criticism that Google faced and China faced in their relation with Google. We used to say earlier, and this is something that I mention in most places, we used to call, China was trying to control Google. Google was pretending that, we are an American firm, we believe in democracy, So the Chinese government trying to, kind of control us is not acceptable for us. That was what they used to say initially. Then Chinese government just asked them, you are registered in United States, right? So according to your registration there, are you bound to give information to United States government if they ask you? They said, yes. So in that case, what is your problem in providing the same to me? In fact, China, yesterday I was actually talking to Vimal and Professor P.J. Thomas about this Chinese conundrum in the international market. We all criticize China for certain things that it does. I mean, like human rights violations within China and things like that. One of the things that I wonder is that what is the problem of capitalist countries with China? China is basically trying to tell the capitalist countries that we are ready to play according to your rules in the global market. We have liberalized our kind of market, and we have provided export processing zones for you, and then we have allowed your outsourcing here. You are not controlling any of the multinational companies. China is not controlling any multinational companies. In fact, they are controlling labor to suit the interests of the multinational companies. There is no labor union, trade union rights allowed in China, which is actually what the multinationals wanted. That's being given in China. The only thing is that China is a one-party dictatorship is what irritates Europe and Japan and many other countries. Otherwise, in Sri Lanka, for example, when Sri Lanka collapsed, Sri Lankan economy collapsed, people were criticizing China for the loans that it has given to Sri Lanka. I looked at the disaggregated, kind of a loan that Sri Lanka had taken. It was only 9% from China. The rest was from World Bank and various other European countries and Japan. Even Japan had given more loan to Sri Lanka than China. So, demonizing China is a project of capitalism, it's a political project. Otherwise, China is playing by the rules of global capitalism. So, if it is controlling Google, it is controlling Google as Indian government is trying to control Twitter or Facebook, or America is trying to control Facebook, not beyond that. So, we used to call at that point of time, it is China's Google problem and Google's China problem. The Google's China problem and China's Google problem was solved globally, whereby the nation state agreed to play by the rules of platform capitalism in a big way for some of the concessions that these companies will give individual nation states so that they can save their face. Nothing beyond that. And the third thing, so one is actually the economic restructuring that is happening, particularly in the labor market. The second thing is the way in which nation state is transforming itself. And the third is actually the way in which individual freedom is put at stake. Liberal democracy understands individual from a liberal individualistic perspective. Liberal individualism believes in the autonomy of the individual, the self-determination of the individual. If liberal democracy believes in self-determination of the individual and autonomy of the individual, then freedom of the individual is upheld as utmost importance in liberal democracy. With the emergence of platform capitalism and the surveillance mechanisms that it is not surveillance mechanism to begin with. They are only using the data for advertisement. Right? I mean, that is the purpose initially. It's a value creation. A Google search is actually, Google is allowing you to search information, and then it takes your information, what you search. Okay, you search for soaps, you search for books, you search for shampoo, you search for whatever. And then that information is used for focusing, targeting advertisements. That is the simple reason, that is the simple economic logic of platform capitalism. But this simple economic logic of platform capitalism has a major political consequence that this data becomes vulnerable to be used in many other ways. And then, for example, Uber can track the activities of its drivers through its apps. Facebook actually uses the data for many other experiments that they are conducting in their labs. Google is using this data for many other experiments that they are conducting in their lab. And nation states are increasingly collaborating with these kind of companies to get this data for their own use. And it's a possibility. They might, initially they might deny, but then, it is widely known that such technologies breed new kinds of technologies for surveillance. There is this fascinating book written by Shoshana Zuboff, Surveillance Capitalism, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, in which she understands that there is a global transition from earlier regimes to a new kind of political regime. And in this new political regime, privacy becomes a value in itself for capitalism to produce value. Like the photo of the Italy that I said that you would post in Facebook, and much more. But then what happens is that the nation state also has actually catched upon the technologies provided by platform capitalism to serve its own interests. I will give you a couple of examples. There was this massive arrest of many of the mafia dons across Europe a couple of years ago. The way in which they could be identified was through a kind of technology called Anon. It's a kind of phone, message texting device. Only 11,800 people used it. The feature of this technology is that if you send a message, immediately it will be erased. It is stored nowhere. It is stored nowhere. Nobody can retrace it. Any deleted message from your Gmail can be, kind of retraced. Anything that you delete from Facebook can be retraced. Anything that you delete from WhatsApp can be retraced. But this particular thing you cannot retrace. The mafia dons were actually very interested in this particular technology. And it was popularized through the technology suppliers to these mafia dons. So it became very popular. And after 1 year or so, 800 people were arrested for their connection with the drug mafia, which is a good thing. But then the only difference was that this particular messaging technology was devised and brought to the market by Federal Bureau of Investigations, USA. They produced this technology. They allured the mafia dons to buy it through people whom they have connections in other ways, and then arrested these 800 people. And then we know the story of Pegasus. In fact, I have a personal kind of experience. Not that somebody used Pegasus to, we don't know. But in 2012, I make a Facebook post about a voting in United Nations on Palestine. Suddenly, in 2012, some of the Latin American countries, for the first time, voted in favor of Israel and not in favor of Palestine. So I was wondering what is happening over. They are all vassal states of United States because they are all located, near Philippines and in that ocean. So probably, Panama and many other, Latin American countries also voted in favor of Israel rather than Palestine. So I was not able to explain. This is the only explanation I could give. In 2017, a few more. I put a Facebook post. Anybody who wants to, see it, I can show you. Again, UN voting. A few more countries like Mexico votes in favor of Israel and not. I'm surprised. Why this? Okay, globe is changing. And I said, I'm dreading the moment India would vote in favor of, Israel and not Palestine. Whether it happens or not, we don't know. Because by that time, BJP had come to power, actually. So it had not happened at that point of time. Then, last year, this huge investigation report about Pegasus, the spyware that Israel produced, was published by New York Times or Washington Times, I'm not sure. I can't immediately recollect one of these papers, in which it said that from 2011 onwards, these Latin American countries were actually buying this Pegasus from Israel and using it against their political opponents, in the guise of saying that this is to actually capture the drug mafia, that we are using it, but they used it against their political opponents. In 17, what happened? Mexico bought Pegasus, and that was why my Facebook post was, I was puzzled, to understand why Mexico is voting for Israel. It bought Pegasus. Now the Indian case, I don't need to tell you. India also voted in favor of Palestine, and there is this argument that we also vote Pegasus. I mean, it's not clearly known. There is a case on this going on. The thing is that this kinds of technology that platform capitalism created has been used by nation states at a massive level. And then new technologies like ChatGPT and chatbot that Google is inaugurating will further aid this, reinforcement of this tendency globally. It reinforces this, globally. And and you see, you look at these kinds of developments that happen in with Uber, for example, or Google, for example. They are trying to have this driverless cars. There is a way in which we are actually attracted to this artificial intelligence because it provides us with new vistas of entertainment. It provides us with new vistas of technological progress, unheard until today. But then these new technologies come with some kind of a risk which we are undermining. That is the point that I'm trying to make. Platform capitalism is providing facilities, platforms, affordances that we all like, enjoy. The Uber, driverless car is a very interesting thing. The Uber driverless car actually hit a person, and that person died in Texas. For a brief period, then all experiments were stopped. Do you know how this happened? This happened not because there were sensors in the car to detect that a human was crossing the road, so it should stop. But what happened was that the person was so close to the car when she crossed. Less than 6 seconds. As Ajay Agarwal clearly shows in his book, Uber car is using a technology that is not deterministic but probabilistic. In the sense that in the probabilistic technology, they are looking at the probability of this alien object coming in front of the car is a human or not. It did not have the enough processing time to decide that it is a human and then stop the car. So the kind of technological change that happens at multiple levels, it displaces labor on the one hand, it produces disguised unemployment on the other, it coerces nation state into its ideological structure. But beyond all that, the autonomy of the individual, the self-determination of the individual is under threat by these technologies. And there is this interesting kind of story. For example, one of the reasons why socialism was hated by capitalism is that it challenged this individual autonomy and freedom of the individual. There is this story, about, probably some of you, I think the elders here would have heard this story about two dogs going to see Pope in Vatican. One is from United States of America, the other is from Socialist Soviet Union at that time, in the 60s. So they meet in the streets of Vatican, and both dogs are very prosperous. Both dogs are very prosperous. So the Russian dog, the Soviet Union socialist, the dog coming from the socialist country, asked the dog coming from the capitalist country, "You have freedom there, you have everything there, why are you coming here? Your prosperity, it's a heaven." He said, I don't have, I'm restless, I don't feel like a human being under this capitalism, my very demeaning existence in capitalism. So I want to, kind of pray to God and then get some, kind of ethical relief, and that's why I've come. And then the American dog asked the socialist dog, "You are very prosperous, your country is giving everything to you. Why are you coming here, in Vatican?" He said, I want to bark. The only reason why the socialist dog has gone all the way to Vatican is that it wanted the freedom to bark. Now what happens? You criticize socialism for not allowing people to bark. And now, under platform capitalism, you don't allow, in liberal democracy, people to bark. You are aiding nation states to stop people from barking. You are using your own technologies to control individual behavior, reinforcing certain kinds of individual that suits you. You criticized socialism all along for not giving, a kind of freedom, and now platform capitalism has come to a circle where it takes away the very same freedom that it celebrated. all along. The very same freedom that it glorified all along. So the way in which platform capitalism has been trying to project itself in the global domain as a pure, kind of economic phenomena based upon value extraction is a misnomer. That is not how it works. It has immediate relationship with the way in which global governance is reshaping itself. And I will conclude by giving one more example. Many of the global companies think that, they have a claim to global governance. Facebook, Google, Apple, and many other such companies believe that they have a claim, a stake on global governance, the way in which the planet is governed. And this is because of the immense influence that they wield over individuals who use these platforms. We have already become slaves to these platforms. And that is where exactly their strength comes from. And how do we change this? I mean, we are in a situation where there is a need for an ethical movement that can understand this phenomenon in a wider sense. There has to be a political movement that can comprehend this emerging scenario of platform capitalism and its consequences, both economic and political consequences. Not just, patchworks are not enough, not adequate. Like, for example, giving this monthly doles to people, etc. In his work on inequality. Massive work. I mean, like he has written this that inequality is increasing, and there has to be a global focus on reducing inequality. But reducing inequality in what way? Reducing inequality is not an easy phenomenon. It has to be a political movement. It has to have a political project. But that political project is unfortunately missing at this point, and this is precisely where we have reached. In the 80s, a global restructuring of the economy happens, and based on that, new technologies flourish, and that new technology create new possibilities for digital and biotechnologies to flourish, and then they have actually in turn created the whole edifice called platform capitalism, where it is not merely an economic phenomenon, but it is a political phenomenon that completely alters the rules of global governance altogether. Thank you very much.
Since nobody is asking, I thought I'll be the sacrificial lamb or goat. Thank you for the enlightening and wonderful lecture. I just want to ask you about the last concluding remark you made about trying to equate socialism with capitalism. And I know it is a favorite idea of yours. Yeah, you are saying that capitalism is making the same mistake that socialism made. That is like taking away the individual freedom of people to bark or whatever. Is there a difference of quantity or quality or whatever? For example, in China, when COVID came, there was a massive violation of human rights that they, of course, maybe under the guise of zero COVID policy, they were taking away human freedom because they were, in fact, to some extent, as the information we get is little, but still they were eliminating people, they were quarantining people with force, and also about other human rights violations of type. But here, what capitalism doing, for example, the question of Pegasus and so on, don't you think that it is probably at the high level? Well, the political opponents are surveilled and so on, but the impact that has on the common people, may be much less in capitalism because they still have the opportunity and the freedom to bark. But the quality of the barking may be something different, but still, it may be the resemblance of freedom in capitalism. But when you equate capitalism and socialism, don't you think that it is too early to do that? Maybe we need to wait a little more to see how capitalism is going to take away that freedom. Thank you.
Sure.
And how capitalism offers a more freer society in some sense. So I'm just reminded about what happened in the United States about 4 years ago, following the presidential elections. and the tweets that he made and the subsequent January 6th Capitol riots, and the President of the United States being forced to go out of Twitter in his own country where these values are in some sense sacrosanct. So I would like to have your opinion on that as well.
In fact, Vimal's question is a corollary to what Brother Thomas has asked. See, at the outset, let me make this very clear. If I was ambiguous about it in my talk, that I am not equating socialism and capitalism. I am talking about a certain kind of predilection in capitalism in the past to differentiate itself from socialism by emphasizing on individual freedom. The story that I mentioned is actually a kind of story that tells us the difference between socialism and capitalism as identified, as understood by capitalism. There is no freedom under socialism, but there is freedom under capitalism. I'm saying that if this was a major feature that you thought that capitalism could provide, what is the state of that freedom under platform capitalism? That is what I'm asking. I'm not comparing, because these are not comparable. One of the things that we learn when we look at systems and practices is that you can compare only the comparable. You cannot compare the uncomparable. So I'm not comparing socialism and capitalism, but Robert Hale Bronner had written a fascinating book in 1997 about a future of capitalism, in which he compares capitalism and socialism. One of the things that he says is very interesting. How do you distinguish capitalism from socialism? In capitalism, there is satisfaction of human needs. In socialism also there is satisfaction of human needs. This is actually done by supply and demand in capitalism. It is done by supply and demand in socialism also. But supply and demand is not what fixes the price in socialism, but in capitalism it is supply and demand. The second thing is that the price in capitalism is determined by the change in supply and demand. So when supply reduces, price will go up, right? Under capitalism. Prices will be more or less stagnant, administered prices in socialism. So when there is a scarcity, it is understood in capitalism as a rise in price. Scarcity is understood in microeconomics that you all study. In microeconomics, it's very clear. A scarcity is understood in terms of rising prices in the ideal market system. And then what happens? People like Professor Thomas and myself, who are teaching in universities, understand that there is a scarcity of a particular commodity in the market. It is more profitable to actually produce that commodity and sell in the market rather than teach in the university. We will quit our job and go to the market and sell that particular commodity and reap profit. There is freedom to do that, right? We have the freedom to do that. Under socialism, what happens? Under socialism, suppose there is a scarcity. There is no incentive for anybody to produce it immediately. That was the thing that he understood. Because a bureaucrat has to identify the scarcity and report it. And if there is a scarcity in the first 5-year plan, you probably rectify that scarcity in the second 5-year plan. This makes the whole system lag a lot. So Robert Hale Bronner actually compared these two systems in terms of this economic functioning. What I am saying is that there is actually a way in which you compare this from the political perspective also, wherein this freedom in the economic sphere is very spontaneously brought into the ideological spectrum by capitalism. It's actually a misnomer, but that is how they do it. They tell us that you have the freedom to do everything in capitalism, whereas you don't have the freedom in socialism. Now, on the other hand, I'm asking with the kind of, the question of privacy. I think Charlie, what is his name? Bustler was actually writing in New York Times about the nature of privacy itself. Privacy is not about some of your hidden secrets. It is about your autonomy. It's about your self-determination that is being, kind of taken away without your consent by these companies. The Cambridge Analytics and various other examples are before us. The way in which capitalism glorified individual freedom is no longer
possible because of the changes in the way in which global capitalism functions. I was only pointing to that. I was not comparing these two systems. I mean, if I think that is clear. So there is no comparison at all, but the way in which the criticism against socialism was put, now you are in a spot where you also don't believe in this individual autonomy. That individualism, liberal individualism, used to uphold this freedom of the individual. Now it cannot, because there is no way in which that individual freedom can be upheld at the global level. And the other kind of interesting point that Vimal made about the Trump presidency and aftermath. When Trump lost the election, he refused to give up. He refused to give up in the confidence that this platform capitalism is always there to support him, and has actually moved to that ideological extreme where conservatism and platform capitalism can go hand in hand. But America was not yet ripe for that. Turkey might be ripe for that. Some European countries might be ripe for that. Global South countries might be ripe for that. China might be ripe for that, not yet United States. That was only the point that United States was making. But that does not change anything. That does not change anything about the emergence of global right supremacist conservatism that was facilitated by these very same platforms. These very same platforms helped Trump to come to power. And it might still help to come to power. And Elon Musk has already declared support for Trump. I mean, I don't think he will make it, but then, the ideology of the extreme right was popularized through the platforms of social media and also platform capitalism. These platforms, these affordances, these technologies are still strong. And they are in ChatGPT, for example. I mean, ChatGPT, chatbot, and all those new technologies. I told you how ChatGPT is going to actually affect future work and future thinking and things. It is enormous capability. I mean, people are now making fun of ChatGPT by kind of extracting some examples. Their paid version is much stronger, and it is going to be stronger and stronger in future. I mean, it is their cutoff point is 2021. You must understand the information that is provided to ChatGPT. The cutoff point is September 2021. Now it is 2023. Once they revise their data structure with the new information, now how are they going to restructure it? Restructure it using the same data that we are all providing to ChatGPT as well. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle of recycling. They are going to recycle the same data again to produce much stronger versions of ChatGPT. Artificial intelligence is going to stay. And my point is that artificial intelligence is not innocent of a politics. It has a politics of its own. And that is actually a kind of conservatism that will take much stronger roots in future. And we are thinking of democracy at this point, but unless we have a very strong global national movement to protect democracy, uphold the values of democracy, uphold the values of representative democracy, it is going to collapse in the face of the growing menace of platform capitalism. That was the point that I was trying to tell you. This example is a telling example. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So the idea that in some sense, since we're talking about debating the possibility of democracy under capitalism, I am reminded of Trump's own response to what happened following his when he was ousted from Twitter. The sitting president, when Trump was asked to go out of Twitter, he was blocked from Twitter. He responded by making his own platform. He launched a platform called Truth Social.
Yeah.
So for various reasons, that didn't take off, but at least it offered him the possibility of retaining his followers or to reaching. So in some sense, don't you think that capitalism might offer a more self-correcting balance?
Yeah.
You couldn't imagine something like this happening in China, for instance.
Yeah. In fact, that's actually a wonderful, kind of direction that capitalism could take in future. I don't actually, kind of negate it. But what is happening? I mean, the Trump's experiment is an individual experiment. That is not how capitalism works. I mean, like it has to have the within the capitalist framework, it has to work for a certain logic of value extraction. Otherwise, it's not going to catch up. That is, the economic logic was not there in Trump's initiative. The economic logic of social platforms was not there in Trump's initiative, so it failed. And that is why, many of these, kind of open source kind of platforms also fail because that economic rationale is not there. So the powerful economic rationale that is unleashed by capitalism is the driving force. It is still the trigger, that helps these technologies flourish. Otherwise, it is not simply there. That's the thing. So the Trump's case is an exception. But then that exception tells so many things about the rule. It teaches us a lot about the rule. Our subordination, about our subordination to platform capitalism. Once Trump is out of Twitter, Trump and his followers are deeply worried. That worry is the one that we should understand, rather than he coming back to Twitter, through Elon Musk. Elon Musk is yet another, kind of character to be analyzed in the context of platform capitalism. I'm not digressing into that today. But I think, this is how we should actually, in the perspective of global capitalism. I'm not taking these incidents in isolation. I am trying to understand the interconnectedness of these multiple phenomena that are unfolded. There are contradictions. I don't deny that there are contradictions. Of course, there are tensions. There are contradictions. Nothing is without contradictions and tensions. But above these contradictions and tension, there is a central tendency. That central tendency of platform capitalism is extracting value through the massive collection of private data, threatening individual autonomy and self-determination, which has got an immediate and long-standing political implication and ramification. You're student of economics, right? Good. That's a good question. Because your question has got a very important historical backdrop. The question that you asked about opportunism was posed by capitalism in a very different way in Adam Smith's book itself, called self-interest. It was called self-interest. That you pursuing your self-interest is actually good for everyone. Everyone pursuing their own self-interest is good for everyone. And this was actually, ironically, an idea that was endorsed and approved and recognized by Karl Marx also. Because Adam Smith gets this idea from Mandeville. It's called The Fable of Bees. There is a fabulous book called Fable of Bees. In the book Fable of Bees, the virtue of self-interest is glorified. It criticizes religion for trying to restrict the unleashing of self-interest by people, by introducing moral concepts into people's everyday life. So, virtues into people's life. So, what Fable of Bees was trying to tell you is that virtue does not help human progress. Only evil does. The way in which you say it's opportunism or self-interest. Only that evil helps humanity to progress. This is a capitalist idea. And then Marx very clearly endorsed. Marx said that, many of the vulgar economists are trying to modify this by, kind of sneaking in religious ideas into it and then trying to relate it with moral, ideologies and things like that. Mandeville was more honest, more straightforward in saying that there is no moral concepts behind this self-interest. Only evil will help the progress of history. In fact, Marx in one of his books very clearly endorses Mandeville and says that evil is actually the trigger of progress. The opportunism that you said, self-interest. And that is precisely why Adam Smith said, it is the self-interest that triggers the economy. The baker makes the cake or the bread, not because he or she is interested in feeding you, but because you will pay for the bread and then he can feed himself or she can feed herself. That is why they are doing it. The butcher, he said, is doing the business not because he wants you to eat meat, but because he wants to eat meat himself. So this is actually the opportunism that you were talking about. That has been the trigger of capitalism all along. And everybody understands it. Marx also understood it. In fact, Adam Smith takes this idea from Fable of Bees of Mandeville. That is actually the economic history, basically. So the point here is that whether it is in your self-interest to put up the post of the idli in Facebook, okay, and it is actually benefiting somebody who does not have a stake in it. Somebody who does not have a stake in it. So a whole new concept of capitalism has came up where it is not your labor, but your unlabor that is being exploited for creating value. That is a new kind of opportunism, to use your own term, that has emerged in the global scenario. The platform capitalism, in a certain sense, exemplifies this. You can say that you travel in Uber not to help any global state to use the data against human rights. But you need to go from St. Bergman's College to your home. That is why you are using it, basically. But the way in which it is used is beyond your control, beyond your, imagination. That is where platform capitalism is unique in its formation.
Good afternoon, sir. With the recent technological developments such as the introduction of ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence, has platform capitalism reached its peak level, or is it going to keep on evolving, going to higher levels? And how is it going to impact the world, for the better or for the worse, in the coming years?
No question. I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, in fact, that was what towards the end of my speech I was talking about ChatGPT and its consequences. If you remember what I said towards the end of my talk, we cannot actually talk about good and evil in a relative sense here. It's good for somebody, it may be bad for someone else. Nietzsche has famously said, like things that were valued in one place were trampled in another place. And since things that were glorified in one place were actually not acceptable for people in thus spake Zarathustra, he says something very similar. It is a space time coordinate within which we understand good and evil. So platform capitalism is good for capitalism. It may not be good for everyone. For example, there is a middle class who is actually benefiting from the platform capitalism and its technological developments. Why, for example, there is this hue and cry about Kerala students going abroad. What facilitates this? And how does this happen? I mean, when you want to do it, how does it happen? Because of a change in the global economic order. That was closely associated with the developments in platform capitalism that culminated in the development of platform capitalism in one sense or the other. So in a certain sense, there is no absolute good or evil. But at the same time, if you disaggregate it into, if the consequences are disaggregated as economic consequences, as political consequences, as consequences to freedom, as consequences to democracy, then I think there are tendencies that provide us insights about the negative consequences of the development of platform capitalism. But that is not confined to that. For example, you cannot imagine a society without Google, without Facebook, without Uber, without ChatGPT from now. You write your assignments in ChatGPT. I mean, I did something very funny in the morning before coming to this talk. I opened my ChatGPT and I asked, write a program for a new communist party in India. In 3 seconds, it wrote a 4-paragraph program for a new communist party in India. So first it was about, the mobilization, working class, etc. And then it gave me 4 suggestions. Include the speech of a key leader in the party programs. Second, have dance and songs which glorify your leader and your party. Then third, provide opportunities for comrades to network. And then, finally there was one more thing. I mean, so the thing is that ChatGPT can even write a program for a new communist. It doesn't hesitate. I mean, nobody can organize a communist party with ChatGPT program. But I was just, jokingly, I was just putting it, write a party program for a new communist party in India. That's what it said. And then it said that, with all these suggestions, you can have a socialism and, all those things in future in India if this party is successful. So whatever you want, ChatGPT is providing and you are getting addicted to it. And Google search was again the same thing. Now the newer versions of it will come, you get addicted to it, but there is a risk, there is a cost to this addiction. And that has been exploited by platform capitalism all along. It is not exploiting labor in the conventional sense of traditional classical capitalism. Its mode of extraction of value has completely changed. And in this new mode of extraction of value, new mode of extraction of value is what we are actually talking about. That can be good for certain people, but that can be bad for many others.
ഏറ്റവും ആദരണീയനായ ശ്രീകുമാർ സാർ, ഏറ്റവും സ്നേഹമുള്ള ഷെനി സാറ്, നമ്മുടെ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിലെ പൂർവാധ്യാപകരായ പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട മറ്റ് ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിലെ അധ്യാപകരെ, പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട സുഹൃത്തുക്കളെ, സമയത്തിൻ്റെ പരിമിതിക്കുള്ളിൽ വളരെ പെട്ടെന്ന് എൻ്റെ കർത്തവ്യം നിർവഹിച്ചുകൊള്ളാം. നമുക്കറിയാം, നമ്മുടെ ജീവിതത്തോട് ഒട്ടി നിൽക്കുന്ന ഒരു വിഷയത്തെ സംബന്ധിച്ച് നമ്മുടെ ഇടയിൽ വളരെ കൃത്യമായി സംവദിക്കുകയും വളരെ ആകർഷകമായ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളോട് സംവദിക്കാൻ സാധിച്ച ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട ശ്രീകുമാർ സാറിനുള്ള നന്ദി പറയുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ് എൻ്റെ ഉത്തരവാദിത്വം. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഇതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ലൈം ലൈറ്റ് എന്നുള്ളത് ഈ വിഷയം തന്നെയാണ്. എനിക്ക് അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു പ്രതിഫലനമാണ് യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾ ഇത്രയും പേര് അതിനോട് ചേർന്ന് നിന്ന് സംവദിച്ചതെന്നുള്ളത്. അപ്പോൾ സെൻറ്റ് ബർക്കമാൻസ് കലാലയത്തെ എപ്പോഴും ഹൃദയത്തിൽ സൂക്ഷിക്കുന്ന ഇവിടുത്തെ അധ്യാപകരുമായി അടുത്ത ബന്ധമുള്ള ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട ശ്രീകുമാർ സാറിന് എല്ലാവരെയും പേരിലുള്ള നന്ദി ഹൃദ്യമായി ഈ അവസരത്തിൽ നേരുന്നു. അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട റെജി അച്ഛൻ നമ്മളോടൊപ്പം മുഴുവൻ സമയം തന്നെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. തിരക്കിനിടയിൽ അച്ഛനോടുള്ള നന്ദി ഈ അവസരത്തിൽ ഏറ്റവും ഹൃദ്യമായിട്ട് അറിയിക്കുന്നു. നമ്മുടെ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ ഒരു കുടുംബ സമ്മേളനം കൂടിയാണ് ഇത്. യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ മുഴുവൻ പൂർവാധ്യാപകരും ഏറ്റവും സാധിക്കുന്നവരെല്ലാവരും തന്നെ വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. അധ്യാപകരോട് മുഴുവൻ പേരോടുമുള്ള ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റ് ആദരവും കടപ്പാടും ഈ അവസരത്തിൽ അറിയിക്കുന്നു. മറ്റ് ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിലെ അധ്യാപകർ PJT സാർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, ജോസഫ് സ്കറിയ സാറ്, നമ്മുടെ KK ഫ്രാൻസ് സാറിനെ അനുസ്മരിച്ച ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട ജോസഫ് സ്കറിയ സാറിനുള്ള നന്ദി ഈ അവസരത്തിൽ ഏറ്റവും ഹൃദ്യമായിട്ട് അറിയിക്കുന്നു. മറ്റ് അധ്യാപകർ വിമൽ സാറ്, ജോസ് സാർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, ആനന്ദി സാർ മലയാളത്തിലുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഒരു ഇൻ്റർ ഡിസിപ്ലിനറി സമ്മേളനം എന്ന് തന്നെ വേണമെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് വിളിക്കാം ഇതിന്. അപ്പോൾ അത്രയേറെ ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാം നടന്നിട്ടുള്ളതിൻ്റെ ഏറ്റവും കോറായ സാധനം ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട ശ്രീകുമാർ സാറാണ്. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു എക്കണോമിക്സിലൂടെ വന്ന്, എനിക്ക് സാറിൻ്റെ BA എക്കണോമിക്സുകാരനാണ്, പിന്നീട് MA എക്കണോമിക്സ് കാര്യവട്ടം, അതിനുശേഷം JNUവിൽ നമ്മുടെ CDSൽ MPhil ചെയ്യുന്നു, അതിനുശേഷം ഇപ്പോൾ ഇഫ്ലുവിൽ വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നു പറയുമ്പോൾ ആ ഒരു വേഴ്സറ്റാലിറ്റി നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ സാധിക്കും. സാറിന് ഒരിക്കൽ കൂടി നന്ദിയോടെ ഓർക്കുന്നു. ഏറ്റവും പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട എൻ്റെ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളോട് ഏറ്റവും ഒരു അപ്രീസിയേഷൻ പറയുന്നത് എൻ്റെ ഫസ്റ്റ് ഇയർ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളോടാണ്. എൻ്റെ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞ മറ്റും കൊണ്ടല്ല, എനിക്കത് ഈ ചോദ്യോത്തര വേളയിൽ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ സംവദിച്ചത്, ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ ചോദിച്ചത് നമ്മുടെ UG ഫസ്റ്റ് ഇയർ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളാണ്. അവർക്കുള്ള, മറ്റുള്ളവരെ വിസ്മരിച്ചുകൊണ്ടല്ല, അവർക്കുള്ള പ്രത്യേകമായ ഒരു ഹാറ്റ്സ് ഓഫ് ഈ അവസരത്തിൽ നേരാനായിട്ട് ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നു. ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട ഷിൻ സാറാണ് ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാം കോർഡിനേറ്റ് ചെയ്തത്. ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട ഷിൻ സാറിനുള്ള നന്ദി അറിയിക്കുന്നു. കോമ്പയറിംഗ് ടീം പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് എല്ലാവരോടും നന്ദി പറയുന്നു. പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളോട് എല്ലാവരോടും ഒറ്റ വാക്കിൽ നന്ദി പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ വാക്കുകൾ നിർത്തുന്നു. നന്ദി, നമസ്കാരം. താങ്ക് യു.